I never expected three strangers to know my name, or that they'd been waiting for me. The town had always felt too quiet, almost suspended in its own rhythm, but that afternoon it seemed to pulse with an unusual energy. I had been walking along the narrow road leading to the edge of town, carrying my bag heavier than usual, when I first saw the house. It was older than most of the buildings around it, the kind of place that seemed to grow from the earth itself, timber darkened with age, ivy curling along the walls, windows that caught the sunlight and scattered it like fractured glass. Somehow, it didn't feel abandoned. It felt waiting. I paused at the gate, feeling the air shift. There was a subtle warmth, almost like the house exhaling, and then I saw them. Three women appeared in my peripheral vision, standing in different parts of the front yard. Their presence was not intrusive. They didn't call out, didn't wave, but the way their eyes found me made my pulse quicken. Each of them was striking in her own way, one with quiet strength in her posture, another with a sharp, almost playful glimmer in her gaze, and the last with a serene softness that seemed to pull the world around her into focus. They didn't speak. They just looked, and for a strange, fleeting moment, I felt both exposed and seen, as if they could read the weight of my thoughts before I even had the chance to think them. My own heart thudded in response, a reminder of how little control I had over the pull I suddenly felt toward them. The scent of the garden reached me first, faint jasmine mingled with damp earth, the aroma of something familiar yet impossible to place. I stepped closer to the house, and the crunch of gravel under my shoes seemed deafening. Each step carried me deeper into the quiet suspense, the sun warm on my back, the shadows of the trees stretching toward the house like gentle fingers guiding me forward. A voice broke the silence, not loud, but soft and deliberate, carrying a calm authority that made me freeze. "We've been waiting for you," it said. All three spoke at once, or perhaps it was one voice merging with the others. I could not tell. My chest tightened. The words were simple, yet they reverberated with a strange intimacy. Waiting. For me. I didn't know if I should be frightened or thrilled. I felt drawn in by a magnetic curiosity I couldn't explain, a quiet, urgent need to understand why this house, and these women, felt like something I had been missing without knowing it. My fingers brushed against the gate as I pushed it open, the metal cool and rough against my skin. I swallowed, heart thudding, and took the first step onto the path that led straight to them. Even then, the pull between us was unspoken, charged in the space between glances, the subtle inclinations of their heads, the light shifting in the windows. I had arrived, but in that instant, I realized the story had already begun, and whatever it was that awaited me inside, it was nothing I could have predicted. The door creaked softly as I stepped into the house, a sound that seemed far too loud for the quiet stillness that greeted me. The air inside was warmer, heavier with the scent of polished wood, faint tea, and something floral I couldn't quite place. The dim light from tall windows cast long, gentle shadows, and I felt a strange, almost magnetic pull guiding me further in. The three sisters were there, not crowded together, but spaced around the parlor in a way that made the room feel like it was their stage, and I was the unexpected guest. One sat in a velvet armchair, legs crossed, a book resting in her lap, but her eyes fixed on me with quiet curiosity. Another leaned against a side table, fingers brushing over a small vase of flowers, her expression sharp yet playful. The third was near the fireplace, hands folded lightly, radiating a calm patience that seemed to slow time itself. "Come in," the first one said, her voice soft but steady, carrying warmth that seemed to reach past the surface of the room and into something deeper, private. "We've been expecting you." I swallowed, nodding, and took a tentative step forward. My hands fidgeted at my sides as I tried to find the right words, the right way to respond without revealing how unnervingly drawn I already felt to them. Each sister, in her own subtle way, was measuring me, reading me, and I realized that the curiosity wasn't just mine. They were curious about me too, about my story, my presence, the quiet vulnerability I carried. One moved toward me, almost imperceptibly, offering a small cup of tea. When our fingers brushed, the contact was light but electric, the warmth of her skin lingering on mine longer than it should have. I felt a sudden awareness of the space between us, the slight tilt of her head, the way her eyes softened as she looked at me, and the gentle exhale that seemed to invite trust. Another sister spoke from across the room, her tone teasing but not unkind. "You look like someone who's walked too far today. Sit. Tell us your story." There was a rhythm to her words, a subtle cadence that drew me in, encouraging me to drop the walls I usually held so tightly around my thoughts. I found myself seated on the edge of a worn sofa, the fabric warm under my palms, the sisters positioned in a way that made conversation feel natural yet charged, a quiet tension humming beneath every glance. They shared fragments of their lives, stories laced with humor, regret, and longing, never overt, never heavy-handed, but enough to hint at lives full of depth and quiet heartache. I listened, enthralled, and for the first time since arriving in this town, I felt a curious sense of belonging, a feeling that, despite the strangeness of it all, I was exactly where I was meant to be. Their attention was patient, and their presence enveloping, like a gentle tide pulling me closer without words. By the time the light shifted, falling in golden slats across the wooden floor, I realized that something had changed. I had stepped inside their world, and already I was a part of it, though I could not yet comprehend how or why. All I knew was that I wanted to stay. By late afternoon, the house seemed to settle around me, the heavy quiet of old wood and fading sunlight softening the edges of my nervousness. One of the sisters, her presence calmer than the others, her movements measured but warm, invited me outside. The garden was a hidden world. Lanterns hung from low branches, petals scattered across the stone path, and the soft hum of bees drifted through the air, punctuated by the gentle rustle of leaves. We walked slowly, her steps guiding mine without words, the space between us charged with something I hadn't anticipated. I noticed the delicate curve of her hand as it brushed against a flower, the way her hair caught the fading light and glimmered like strands of copper. Every detail seemed amplified, as though the garden itself had sharpened the focus of my senses. "Do you come here often?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. She smiled, a soft, almost secretive expression that seemed to hold decades of understanding. "I've always been here," she said. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment the world shrank to nothing but the two of us. The faint scent of her perfume, the warmth radiating from her, the steady rhythm of her breathing. We found a bench tucked beneath a flowering arch, petals brushing my sleeve as we sat. She spoke softly, sharing fragments of her life in a way that invited honesty without demanding it. I told her pieces of mine, the fears I carried, the moments I had longed for connection, the strange pull that had drawn me here. At some point, her hand moved to rest lightly on mine. The contact was brief, but it left a warmth that lingered long after her fingers withdrew. Her touch was grounding, steadying, a quiet acknowledgement of the emotions that had been swelling inside me. I felt a mixture of awe and vulnerability, my chest tightening with an awareness of both the age gap and the delicate intimacy forming between us. She leaned slightly closer to whisper something trivial, a comment about the fading light, but the closeness made my heart hammer. Her cheek brushed against my shoulder, just lightly, and I felt the reassuring steadiness of her presence. For a moment, I almost forgot to breathe, caught in the quiet tension of proximity, in the unspoken understanding that something significant was unfolding. Time seemed to slow. The distant hum of the town faded, replaced by the subtle symphony of the garden. A breeze stirring leaves, petals rustling, our shared breaths mingling with the scent of blossoms. The warmth of her body near mine, the softness of her hand, the careful way she regarded me. It all became a language without words, a quiet confession of trust and curiosity. When we finally rose, the moment didn't end. I could feel her attention lingering, a tether connecting us even as we walked back toward the house. I realized then that the pull I felt wasn't fleeting. It was the beginning of something delicate, slow, and infinitely compelling. I wanted to stay in that quiet space of intimacy, to explore the layers of connection that had begun to form, and to understand the depth of what had been waiting for me all along. The evening had draped the house in shadows, the glow of lamplight flickering against the walls and painting the room in warm amber tones. I found myself in the library, a space lined with tall, heavy bookshelves, the scent of old paper mingling with the faint aroma of burning wood from the fireplace. The sisters were here, each with her own space, Yet the room pulsed with an unspoken tension, a silent choreography of attention and subtle gestures that drew me in deeper than I expected. One sister was perched on a ladder, pulling a book from the shelf with a quiet grace that made every movement seem deliberate. Another reclined in a leather chair, legs crossed, a teasing smile playing on her lips as she watched me from the corner of her eyes. The third leaned forward on the sofa, fingers lightly tracing the edge of a book, her gaze fixed on me in a way that made my chest tighten. I couldn't ignore the way my mind began to pull in different directions. Each sister had a presence that demanded attention in its own unique way, and I felt a strange, almost guilty tug toward all of them at once. The playful banter between the two in the corner drew laughter from me, yet I felt a pang as I noticed the shadow of longing in the eyes of the third. My own emotions tangled, curiosity, desire, guilt, fascination, all swirling together in a slow, dizzying rhythm. A small brush of hands while passing a book sent an unexpected shiver up my spine. I felt the warmth of skin, the faint pressure of a touch that lingered just a second too long, and I realized how keenly I was aware of every detail. The softness of a knee brushing mine as we sat side by side, the subtle tilt of heads toward me, the quiet glance that seemed to ask a question without words. It was intoxicating and confusing in equal measure. Their attention felt like a mirror, reflecting back all the parts of me I usually kept hidden. I was aware of the age gap, of the social expectations I might be defying simply by being drawn to them. Yet that awareness only heightened the tension. Each moment felt suspended, weighted with emotion I couldn't yet name. "Do you always make people feel this conflicted?" One sister asked lightly, teasing but with a depth that made me pause. I laughed, trying to hide my unease, but the truth was inescapable. I was completely unmoored, caught in a delicate web of fascination and longing, unsure of where I ended and their influence began. The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with unspoken possibilities, and I realized that this was a test of patience and self-awareness. The subtle rivalry, the gentle teasing, the tender glances, they were all shaping me, drawing me closer even as I struggled to keep my bearings. My heart raced, my thoughts tangled, and yet I knew that this confusion was the prelude to something far more profound, a slow-burn connection that would demand honesty, courage, and vulnerability. By the time I left the library, the warmth of the lamplight lingering on my skin, I understood one thing with clarity. I was irrevocably entangled in their world, and the emotional storm brewing within me was only just beginning to settle. The rain began as a soft patter against the windows, a gentle rhythm that filled the parlor with a hushed intimacy. The house smelled of wet earth and the faint sweetness of tea, mingling with the subtle perfume of the sisters. I sat on the edge of a sofa, a blanket draped loosely around my shoulders, and felt the warmth of the room contrast sharply with the chill of the rainy afternoon outside. One of the sisters approached quietly, carrying 2 cups of steaming tea. The simple gesture, the careful placement of a cup in my hands, the brief brush of her fingers against mine, felt like a quiet acknowledgement of my presence, a subtle invitation to let my guard down. "Here," she said softly, her voice steady and unhurried. "Drink. It will warm you." I lifted the cup, inhaling the aroma, and felt a calmness settle over me, though my chest still carried the remnants of tension and confusion. The other sisters moved closer, each in their own way creating a space that was both safe and charged with emotion. Their eyes held no judgment, only curiosity and a quiet encouragement that made it easier to reveal pieces of myself I had long kept hidden. I've always been careful," I admitted, my words tentative, careful about who I let in, who I allow myself to feel for. I glanced at them, noting the way each reacted, the softening of a gaze, a small nod, the almost imperceptible smile that suggested understanding. "I didn't expect this," I added, gesturing vaguely to the room, to them, to the feeling that had begun to root itself inside me. One sister leaned forward slightly, resting a hand lightly on my arm. The contact was brief but grounding, sending a warmth through me that had nothing to do with the tea. Another sat beside me, her shoulder brushing mine in a gesture so subtle it could have been accidental, yet it carried an unspoken reassurance. The third moved behind me, her presence a quiet anchor, as if her proximity alone said, "You are safe here." The vulnerability in their quiet attentions drew me in further. I found myself speaking of my fears, my regrets, the moments I had felt invisible or misunderstood. They listened, not as strangers, but as if they had always known these parts of me existed, waiting for me to finally acknowledge them. There was no rush, no pressure, just a slow, deliberate unfolding of trust. The rain outside intensified, and I realized I no longer noticed the weather at all. The world had contracted to this room, to the shared warmth, to the gentle touches that lingered like whispers on my skin. I felt accepted, truly seen, and the realization was almost overwhelming. I was no longer alone in my uncertainty. The sisters had made a space for me, a space where vulnerability was met with care, where hesitation could coexist with gentle encouragement. By the time the rain slowed, I understood something profound. The connection forming here was not fleeting or superficial. It was patient, deliberate, and tender, a slow-burning intimacy that could weather uncertainty, social expectation, and the weight of our differences. And in that quiet acceptance, I felt the first true stirrings of belonging, the kind that sinks into your chest and settles like sunlight on a rainy afternoon. That evening, the house seemed to hold its breath. The dining room was bathed in candlelight, warm and flickering, casting soft shadows across the polished wooden table. A quiet melody drifted from a small music box in the corner, the notes delicate and persistent, like the slow beating of a heart. I sat across from the three sisters, each of them illuminated in the glow, their eyes reflecting the firelight and something far deeper: expectation, patience, and unspoken longing. We spoke little at first, letting the silence stretch and settle between us. The air felt thick with emotion, a tension that had been building over days now palpable, almost tangible. My own chest felt tight, each breath measured, as if inhaling too deeply might shatter the fragile, perfect balance of the moment. They watched me with attentiveness, the kind that does not demand but invites honesty, and I realized that the vulnerability I carried could no longer be contained. I've never felt this way before, I admitted, my voice low, almost trembling. I didn't know it was possible to feel seen in this way. I gestured vaguely to the space around us, to the warmth, to the gentle light, to the way their presence seemed to cradle me. And yet here I am. One sister reached across the table, her fingers lightly brushing mine. The contact was small, almost delicate, but it sent a jolt through me, grounding me while also reminding me of the weight of the moment. Another leaned slightly forward, her eyes soft, her hand resting on the edge of the table near mine, not touching yet creating a tether, an unspoken connection. The third remained quiet, but her gaze was steady, full of understanding, and I felt it as surely as I felt the firelight on my skin. The confession spilled from me then, unguarded and raw. I spoke of fears I had carried, of judgment, of inadequacy, of the impossibility of belonging somewhere that seemed too good to be real. They responded not with words that rushed to fill the space, but with patience, small smiles, quiet nods, the steady warmth of hands brushing against mine, the subtle way their shoulders leaned toward me as if to say, "We are here. We see you." The tension between us was no longer uncertain. It was a living thing, pulsing and breathing, inviting me to step fully into it. My own longing was mirrored in the careful glances, the fleeting touches, the gentle inclination of heads. The room, the candles, the music, all became a private world where emotion could exist in its rawest form without fear. And then, in the stillness, something shifted. Laughter, soft, unrestrained, and shared, broke through the intensity, weaving warmth into the tension. It was a release, a subtle acknowledgement that despite fear, desire, and hesitation, connection had been achieved. Hands met hands, shoulders brushed, and a quiet, mutual understanding settled over us. The bond we had been cultivating was real, patient, and infinitely tender. By the time the candles burned lower, I realized that this was the moment everything had been building toward. The emotional storm had reached its peak, and we had emerged into a fragile, luminous clarity. I was not alone. I was seen. And whatever came next, I would step forward willingly, into the quiet, unwavering embrace of trust, care, and shared intimacy. Morning arrived gently, the first rays of sunlight spilling over the garden, mist clinging softly to the petals and the stone path. I stepped outside, the cool dew dampening the soles of my shoes, and felt the hush of the early day wrap around me. The sisters were already there, standing in quiet anticipation, their figures bathed in the pale gold of dawn. The garden smelled faintly of jasmine and rain-soaked earth, a scent that had become synonymous with warmth and belonging in the short time I had been here. I paused, my chest tightening with a mixture of awe and relief. The past days had been a slow unraveling of tension and uncertainty, each moment leading me to this fragile, luminous clarity. The quiet intimacy, the gentle touches, the unspoken conversations, all of it had led to a singular truth. I belonged here, with them. In this space they had crafted as much for me as for themselves. We moved closer together without words, the rhythm of our steps subtle and instinctive. The eldest sister reached out, letting her hand hover near mine before gently resting it there. The warmth of her touch grounded me, a silent promise that I was seen, understood, and accepted. The second sister's fingers brushed against my arm as she stepped alongside, her smile a soft curve of reassurance. The third remained just behind, her presence steady and comforting, as if the very air between us had become a shared heartbeat. We paused beneath the flowering arch, the morning light catching in their hair and highlighting the quiet strength and grace of their forms. I looked at each of them in turn, taking in the details I had memorized without realizing it, the tilt of a head, the glimmer of sunlight in an eye, the subtle way their shoulders relaxed when they felt safe. And in that moment, I felt an overwhelming surge of gratitude, love, and quiet wonder. "Welcome," one of them said softly, her voice carrying warmth without expectation, a word that encapsulated everything I had felt yet could never fully express. "You're home now." I smiled, my throat tight, unable to articulate the depth of my feelings. Instead, I let my presence speak for me, hands lightly clasped together with theirs, shoulders touching, a subtle leaning into the shared space of comfort and trust. There was no rush, no pressure, just a slow, deliberate acknowledgement that our bond was real, patient, and enduring. The garden seemed to exhale around us, the mist lifting to reveal the brilliance of morning light dancing on petals, the soft rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze, and the faint scent of blossoms carried across the air. Everything felt quieter, calmer, yet alive with an energy I could not have predicted. Here, in the soft intersection of sunlight and shadow, of silence and shared understanding, I realized that the story we had been writing together was only beginning, but it was already perfect in its first, fragile chapter. And so I stood there, hand in hand with them, heart full, entirely at ease for the first time in years. The world outside could wait. Here, in the warmth of the garden and the presence of these three extraordinary women, I had found not just love, but belonging, a slow, steady, and deeply human intimacy that would endure, gently, indefinitely.